Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. Our next presenter will be presenting virtually. Daisy's a current graduate student and teaching assistant on nanotechnology at NC Central University, Durham. She has a master's degree in hydrobiology and fisheries and a bachelor's degree in zoology from Delta State University in Nigeria. She developed interest in GIS when she listened to a student talk passionately about this tool at a conference in Africa and intends to pursue a doctorate degree in environmental and geospatial sciences. She advocates for GIS to become a core subject in middle and high schools because that will give teenagers an opportunity to develop early interest in data, statistics, and programming.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. It's a pleasure to present this morning. I will be using a story map for this presentation. That's because earlier this year, I was privileged to be in a team that's had a water quality project in hand, right? And I just wanted to explore the various applications that GIS can elude us to. Being new in GIS from an environmental standpoint, I joined that team for that project, and I experienced one hand how maps were formed with ArcGIS applications like ArcGIS Pro, the use of dashboards that are interactive, the use of Survey 123, and the use of GIS hubs. And it interests me a lot to use the story maps, because for that project, I was assigned the duty to write on the capabilities of ArcGIS applications. In that process, I got to know more about the story maps, and I always carry out presentations or give presentations on PowerPoint. And I'm like, oh, story map is the PowerPoint of GIS. That's the initial motivation for a story map for this presentation. Today I'll be talking on a project that is ongoing, and it's titled AMS, a preliminary manifestation of COVID-19. And for the purpose of this conference, I'll be exploring Alzheimer's data to acknowledge AMS, which is altered mental status, as a preliminary manifestation of COVID-19 in older population. Now, every year, we have various outputs from different sets of population, but COVID hits. And when COVID hit, it took us off it took us unaware. It hit so bad that we had to adjust so fast. And this COVID was declared a global health emergency by WHO, which is World Health Organization, in 2019, and a pandemic in 2020. The most significant health problem that is associated with COVID-19 is the severe acute respiratory syndrome. This leads to respiratory failure, leads to pneumonia, and it leads to death. Consequently, now the elderly population are vulnerable population in the society, and they get older, and as they get older, develop various illnesses. These illnesses are due to the standpoint in life as they go from exposure to microplastics, to climate change, to poor air quality, they develop various diseases as they grow older, and they become vulnerable to other diseases that can have adverse effects on them. My interest in the elderly population is from the point of mine, which is the fact that I grew up with my grandma, and she deteriorated right before me, from a child to a teenager to an adult. I watched her grow. I watched her, a very strong woman, become feeble, become weak, become vulnerable. And she developed altered mental status at a point in her life. So in United States, individuals that are 65 years or older are affected with COVID-19 had the highest rate of admission into hospitals. They had the highest rate of admission into intensive care. They had the highest rate of fatalities because of their vulnerability. Now, how did this incident happen? It happened because they usually have because COVID-19 is all about person-to-person transmission. This transmission occurs through droplets, as we have been told severally. And this virus, which is this COVID-19 virus, may survive up to 9 days on surfaces. It means when somebody coughs, or when the virus is deposited on surfaces, those viruses stay there inactive for that long until they come in contact with respiratory tracts, like the nose, like the mouth, like the eyes, like the ears, through which they can become alive and affect those respiratory organs in the body. To understand the impacts this COVID-19 has on our elderly, I would like us to look further and understand what AMS is, altered mental status. For some of us, it's a new word, but for most of us, it's an acronym that we have been using for a while now. Now, altered mental status is a variation in the physiological functions in human. It's often caused by certain illnesses, certain disorders, and the elderly are mostly present with altered mental status due to the infections they are exposed to, due to the drug-to-drug interactions that they are exposed to, due to the changes in the environment they find themselves. And nearly 10% or 20% of hospitalized patients are discovered to be older person that has delirium. Now, what does this altered mental status do? Now, it reduces the mental capacity of a person, in as much as it erases those mental capabilities that have been developed by persons over time. It gently erases them, though it is temporal, but it has the great capability of being permanent. And when altered mental status becomes permanent, it has a presenting of Alzheimer's disease. What is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's disease is a disease that is presenting in elderly population that shows disorientation in these population. Studies have described typical clinical manifestations of the presentation of delirium, of depression, and dementia in these older population. So generally, individuals that are affected with COVID-19 develop symptoms within a few days, right? Or within some weeks after being exposed to the virus through human transmission, of course. But then a group of scientists in China, they studied over 44,000 patients, and they found out that most patients with COVID-19 that are elderly, they never showed any symptoms of COVID-19 at all. A lot of these patients did not show the symptoms of COVID-19. But they discovered that these same patients, they showed symptoms of disorientation, of depression, of loss of memory, of loss of speech, of fatigue, of unprecedented pain. And they wondered, if we test these people, these elderly patients for COVID-19, is it possible that this altered mental status is an indication that they have COVID-19 since they do not present with symptoms of COVID-19 already? So several studies that were carried out, like I said, this is a work in progress. And I started off by studying the papers and review articles from researchers, from scientists that are looking for a preliminary diagnosis for COVID-19 in elderly that especially does not have any kind of symptom of the disease presently. This is going to help them diagnose the disease beforehand. It's going to help them know what to do even before the disease is being mentioned to be called COVID-19, to help them curb the rate at which the elderly die of COVID-19. Now, Ward in 2020, in his report, he carried out a research with 4 patients that he diagnosed with COVID-19 who initially presented with altered mental status. They didn't have any symptoms of COVID-19, like maybe cold, pneumonia, fever, cough, respiratory disorder, coughing, and nausea or flu. But then they had altered mental status. So he decided to test these 4 patients for COVID-19. Now, all these patients he tested were COVID-19 positive. They had significant morbid medical problems. They had dementia. They were living together in a communal environment. Like I said earlier, COVID-19 is spread by person-to-person transmission. So he thought, and he said, these people are living together. A lot of them have dementia. A lot of them are delirious of their environment. Some of them are fatigued. Some have Alzheimer's. And these are all presentation of altered mental status. Like the word altered, it means the mental status has been changed from the normal presentation it is supposed to portray. And as he tested them, they came out to be positive with COVID-19. And he said that this might have been a greater risk if they if they were not diagnosed early enough. It would have actually cost their lives. So each of these 4 patients developed AMS without fever, without respiratory symptoms, without any form of symptoms at all. Since they had COVID-19 after the diagnosis, they were then transferred to the emergency room, where they were tested properly and they were hospitalized. Now, this is result from these 4 elderly patients. Initially, that were presented with AMS, it showed he saw that they were always confused. They were always agitated. They refused care. They were disoriented. They had loss of appetite. All of them were living together in the same environment. And immediately they were diagnosed of COVID-19. Within a week, they started portraying symptoms of COVID-19. But because this disease was intercepted early enough, it didn't really affect them as much. Now, this is a picture of a lady with altered mental status. Now, these post-its on her are like indicators of what the brain would have stored normally, but this disease has erased those storage parts of the brain and has given her memory loss, and she is now disoriented. Alzheimer's is very prevalent, especially in developing nations. And here is a map that shows the projected rise in Alzheimer's case by 2025. This map shows that the cities that have Alzheimer's are those cities that, one, has a high rate of population, and it's also an indication that these cities with Alzheimer's have elderly people abiding in them. The graph is also an estimated lifetime risk for Alzheimer's by sex from age 45 to age 65. Now, this graph shows us that at age 45, 10.3% of men portrayed had the symptom of had the diagnosis of Alzheimer's, while 19.5% of women had that of Alzheimer's. And at age 65, it also showed that women population had more presentation of Alzheimer's than men population. Now, before I go through my methodology, excuse me, these reports that were carried out by four elderly people helps us understand the importance of having a pre-diagnosis, especially for people that are not portraying some form of symptom of the disease, so that we can help combat the rate at which the deaths by COVID-19 increases in the state. It gives us a loophole to know that there is another way to check for COVID-19, especially in the elderly, because altered mental status is hardly prevalent in young population, but it's mostly prevalent in elderly population. Thomas did a regression analysis of 60 patients. He tested them of COVID-19, and he determined they were tested to be positive of COVID-19. He did this testing to determine if the presentation of AMS was associated with adverse outcome of the disease, and his results showed that increased risk in mortality of patients that presented with AMS with the classification of death were prevalent. Now, AMS can help in early diagnosis of COVID-19, especially in the older population. Now, to understand this subject more, I went to the NC Vital Statistics to download data of persons that died of Alzheimer's disease in the state of North Carolina. Now, this data, this NC Vital Statistics data had a lot of death data from cancer to Alzheimer, to schizophrenia, to malaria, to several other diseases. But then they had classification of deaths. This classification of death segregated one type of death from another. And for Alzheimer's, the classification of death was GO39, indicating that these people, the COD here, classification of death, was GO39, indicating that these people with this classification died of Alzheimer's disease. Now, for the purpose of this map, this data was exported to Excel spreadsheets and imported into ArcGIS as a standalone table. And to give this, I downloaded data from NC Vital Statistics, of course. It was exported as a standalone table. And to give the data speciality so the data can be mapped, I joined the table to an existing feature class that also had zip code classification with the join and relates to map this data, to understand further the distribution of of altered mental status presenting as Alzheimer's in the state of North Carolina. I made a nice and neat graduated colored map where the frequency of Alzheimer's death was mapped and normalized by population using the quantile method of classification. So here is the map showing the distribution of Alzheimer's deaths by population. Now, the legend shows the deep blue the deep blue regions had the highest number of COVID-19 Alzheimer's deaths, followed by the light blue regions, these regions, and the lighter blue and the cream regions had less presentation. Now, this is an indication that a lot of states, of course, all states in North Carolina, all counties in North Carolina have the elderly population. But through this map, we can now understand that these states with the highest rate of Alzheimer's death had more older population than these other states with low number of Alzheimer's. These other states with low number of Alzheimer's population. It means these states with higher Alzheimer's population had more deaths significantly. Now, this is a graduated colored map, and I used a quantile form of classification to get a precise distribution of the death by population. And I used this color distinction to have to portray quick distincts between these groups of classification. Now, in March, February or March 2022, I presented a poster on impacts of COVID-19 on the elderly population of North Carolina. And that map is this, right? So to further understand the relationship between altered mental status and COVID-19 related elderly death, we will look at this map of COVID-19 death rates in the elderly population of North Carolina by county. Now, this map, excuse me. This map also shows the distribution of the elderly population in North Carolina and those that died, that had the highest number of deaths by COVID-19 in North Carolina. If we check this map critically, we'll see that this dark presentation, these dark colors indicates the highest number of deaths by COVID-19 of elderly in the state of North Carolina. Most times we will expect the cities that are the largest, like Mecklenburg, like Wake County, to have the highest number of elderly population. But then it's evident that the elderly population are mostly in places where they go for retirement, because they move away from the cities to other parts of the counties where they have family members, where they have communal homes, where they have nursing homes, and where it's easy for them to carry on their daily living without so much as interactions that will affect their peace of mind. Now, with the use of GIS, we can expound on the relationships and similarities between AMS and COVID-19 related deaths in older population of North Carolina by the use of the available data. But then we can only use the data that we can get. Like we saw earlier, Alzheimer's data was on zip code level, while COVID-19 data was on county level. These are some of the limitations of the GIS applications, because we only use the data that we have available to us to be used for those purposes. Now, these maps give a clear understanding of how fragile the elderly population is and how important it is for them to be given full attention. Though the desired distinction is not so clear on these maps because of the data limitation, but NC Vital Statistics has their data by zip codes, like I said earlier, while NC COVID-19 dashboards has their data by county. However, existing research has proven that in this COVID era, an elderly person presenting symptoms of AMS should be tested for COVID-19 first to rule out this illness and avoid any form of surprise. Adversely, save lives. Thank you.
Do we have any questions here in person? Nope, we have no questions from the room and there are none in the chat. So Daisy, thank you for joining us and presenting today.
Thank you.